Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today it's time to look at the All-USFL teams for the USFL's 2023 season. They just came out a couple days ago, so we're going to look at all the offense, defense, and special teams players, see who made it, and then give my thoughts on exactly who made it, who should have made it, and all that kind of stuff. So without further ado, let's look at the All-USFL offense. The offense was headlined by MVP probable winner Alex McGough. The award hasn't been announced yet, but it's all but basically known that he's going to win MVP. Best quarterback in the league by a mile, easily deserved it. Mark Thompson, dude didn't even play for the first 2 games of the season and had an unbelievable year rushing, had a huge amount of touchdowns. Overall, an incredible running back. Wes Hills started the season off really good and then ended the season really bad. But his beginning of the year stretch ended up being enough to get him on the All-USFL team. Then receivers, we have Corey Coleman and Justin Hall. Corey Coleman, along with Mark Thompson, is one of the two guys that's in the running for Offensive Player of the Year. Coleman ended up leading the league in receiving yards. He was an incredible player across the whole season. Really had a great year, and a lot of people think he might get a shot back in the NFL. And then Justin Hall, of that Gamblers team that had 3 really solid receivers, he was the best on the team. So very nice to see him make it. Then former Packer Jay Sternberger was the All-USFL tight end. Even though Sage Surratt had been leading the league in receiving yards for most of the season, his stretch that ended up getting a bit slower in the end of the season allowed Sternberger to catch him, as Sternberger had the most receiving touchdowns in a single season in the modern USFL, so he deserved it. Then the guys in the trenches, you had Jake Lucina, the Generals, along with Calvin Ashley, and then you had Paul Adams, the guard for the Breakers, and then you had a couple tackles in Avery Genesee and Jaron Jones, who made it again. Jaron Jones made it his second All-USFL appearance, so congrats to him on making it. Overall, very, very solid list, I would say, for the guys who made it on All-USFL, though. There is one guy that I will say was a bit controversial, but congrats to all those guys for being All-USFL in the offense. Then as for the defense, we have the not only non-linebacker in the DPOY conversation in the USFL sack leader, Breland Speaks. His 9 sacks were the best in the league. He had an unbelievable year. Then Adam Rodriguez got the love he should have gotten last year this year. Had a really great year this year. Not as dominant as last year, but still a very solid year. Really solid. And then we have a couple defensive tackles. Toby Johnson, he was the only other player to make it his second straight All-USFL selection. Toby did not really do a lot in terms of getting sacks, but he had an unbelievable 40-plus tackles as a tackle, which showed just how great he was at stopping the run. Then John Atkins Sr., I will talk about him later. I think that this one was the biggest how did he make it of the whole list. Then in terms of cornerbacks, Mark Gilbert, the interception leader, and DJ Daniel both made it for cornerbacks. And then safeties, Arnold Tarpley III and Manny Bunch made it for the safeties of the Maulers and General and Gamblers respectively. Then the trio of DPOY candidates from the linebacker position in Frank Gidna, Kiava Tizino, and Chris Orr made it as the linebackers. Then finally, the special teams, we have Isaiah Henney and Josh Simmons, both of the Maulers getting the punt and kick returner respectively. Both led each category in return yards. Then the best punter was Colby Wadman. He was incredible this year, and he led the league in punt average by like 3. No surprise he won it. Luis Aguilar was the kicker. This was a pretty tough one, but at the end of the year, when you have a guy that had an 8 for 8 game kicking the ball and was incredible for basically all the season, it's no real surprise that Aguilar ended up being the All-USFL kicker. Then Ryan Langan was the long snapper, and then Vinny Papel was the special teams player of the year. So congrats to all those guys for making it. So the first one I want to talk about is the player that I think a lot of people have been saying got snubbed, but really wasn't, and that's Vontae Diggs. A lot of people on Twitter, and I didn't see that many read, but a lot of people on Twitter and Instagram seem to think that he was snubbed for making the All-USFL team on defense when no, he wasn't. Look, it's the same lineup it was last year. They're not, getting rid of a linebacker spot. It's keeping it the exact same as last year with 3 linebackers. The thing with Diggs is that at 0 point in the season was he ever even remotely in the DPOY conversation. It was always from start to finish, Gidna, Tizino, and Orr. Those 3 guys were that. Orr only played in 9 games. He had 81 tackles. If he had played another game and he had a really great game, he may have caught Tizino. But Orr was the better guy of those 3 getting sacks. He had just as many sacks as Vontae Diggs did, but he had 2 more solo tackles and 10 more assisted tackles with another TFL. And while Diggs did have 3 interceptions, so you got to give credit for that there, and one of them was a pick 6. Orr did himself have a fumble recovery, and Diggs did have a couple more pass deflections. But the big deal is that your main job as a linebacker is to get tackles, and the fact that he was 7th in the league at getting tackles compared to these guys shows that. Especially when you consider the fact that, like, when you look at Frank Gidna, Gidna had had an insane 104 tackles. He's the only guy who averaged more than 10 per game, and his 3 interceptions matched Diggs. So no shock that he was above him. Then when you look at Tizino had 2 interceptions and 2 forced fumbles. That's better than the 3 interceptions Diggs had. So really the only argument is Orr, but Orr was, the leader of that defense that, was really solid for most of the year. And so was Diggs' defense. But Orr was just the guy that everyone looked at as that DPOY candidate for most of the season. Diggs, not so much. So overall, I don't think Diggs really deserved to make the list. So I think that was a great decision by the voters, as I'm pretty sure this was voted by the coaches like it was last year, I'd imagine. So yeah. Now, as for the players I think were truly snubbed, the first one is the one that is the closer one, and that's Darius Victor deserving it over Wes Hills. I think that there's a very real case that Victor should have made it over Hills. Now look, Jordan Ellis last year led the league in rushing yards, and he didn't make the All-USFL team because, simply put, there were 2 guys who were better than him for the most part, even though you could argue it. This year, I think Victor was the better guy. Look, Mark Thompson was the best running back in the league this year, and I don't think there's any argument for that. He was insane in the very few games he played. But Darius Victor, I think, was better than Wes. Look, Wes also didn't play. I believe it was the first game in the season. But the fact is that Victor had far less attempts to actually, have his hands on the ball, and he was still able to have a really great year. The best way to look at it is what his stats would have been if he had had the same amount of attempts and receptions. Now, yes, if you give somebody, an extra 80 rush attempts, there's a good chance his average goes down. But even if it would go down to 5 yards per carry, it would still be insane. The fact is on the pace that Victor was doing, if he had had an extra 80 carries to match Wes Hills, he would have had 990 rushing yards, which obliterates what Wes did. And receiving-wise, if he had about the same receptions as Wes did, he'd have nearly 100 more receiving yards as well. The fact is that Victor didn't get a lot of carries. And the fact is they both fumbled the ball 4 times, and fumbled loss is a very niche stat in a lot of ways. But even if you take it fully, it's just, I don't know. Victor also would have naturally had another at least 2 touchdowns. So, to be fair, Wes did beat him in rushing touchdowns. But the fact is that you have a guy who averaged 3.8 yards per carry is your All-USFL running back when you had a guy that had 5.5, didn't. I know you can make the case that Wes deserved it, but I think personally it's just Victor was better than him. I really do think that. I think it's the fact that everyone seems to remember that one game where Victor had like all those fumbles in basically and say that was his bad game. But, I mean, when you look at the stats don't lie. Victor, whenever he had carries, was great. And the fact is, at the end of the year, Victor was still doing as good as he was at the beginning of the year. Whereas the last 3 games of the season, the 3 most important games of the season, Wes disappeared. He was literally not found. That's how bad he was. So, I think Victor deserved it. Now, I know you Breakers fans think I'm just hating on the team. Not always. Because we have Keontae Shad. I legitimately don't know how he didn't make it. Because if you're saying that it's the non-statistical things that show how great you are, you're really stretching that definition by having John Atkins make it over Shad. John Atkins did have 7 pass deflections. That was far more than the 0 Shad had. So that I will admit to that right up front. But you're talking about 4 TFLs for a D tackle in Atkins to Shad's 9 TFLs. 5 more TFLs are better than 7 pass deflections. A pass deflection is just, you're deflecting a pass, which may get an interception. But a TFL, you're losing the opponent yards while keeping the clock going. And Shad had 5 more sacks. Remember, Shad is a DT. This is defensive tackles. He was the only guy behind Breland Speaks up there. He was second in the league in sacks as a defensive tackle. I don't know how Atkins made it above him, because even in terms of, being a defensive, stalwart in the line, while he did have 3 more tackles, Shad had 2 more solo tackles. So, I don't know. I feel it's just Atkins had like 1 week, which was really insane, where Shad just kind of, slowly built it up. Much like Adam Rodriguez last year. He just slowly was, building up and, continuously having solid games. But I think this was definitely the biggest snub. Where, like I said with Victor, I think Victor has a very solid case. And there's a couple other cases you can make made. Some people would say Moifadas deserved it over Rodriguez for defensive end. Some would say that Davion Davis, I believe is who I'm thinking of, deserved it over Justin Hall for receiver. But I don't think so for sure, but this one is the worst. Shad was the better player across the year. Atkins was nowhere near any league leader, basically. And even though his 29 tackles, like I said, are solid for a DT, Shad wasn't far behind. And that 7 pass deflection doesn't make up for the 5 TFL difference. So I'd say that's the biggest one. So overall, that'll do it for my review, reaction, and all that to the All-USFL 2023 team. I think that overall this was a very, very, very accurate group of guys. And actually, you can say, this is just some guy online saying it. But as someone who watched nearly every single game and kept up with stats for the whole year, I think that just a couple of these weren't the best. I think that overall, though, I think this was a much better and more accurate team than last year's. I think last year's had a lot more players you could make very good cases for should have made it. You can make a really great case for nearly the entire offense last year was bad. You could make that case. Whereas this year, I think that everyone that made it, aside from really just the 2 guys I mentioned in Hills and Atkins, were the best players and most deserving. So, playoffs are happening tonight and tomorrow, so be sure to watch those games on NBC and Fox. And then naturally, we'll have a video come out, for the playoffs and all that, next week's stuff. And we'll have a video whenever the awards are fully announced. As always, this has been Zom Fox. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified as soon as I upload any videos. And as always, have a great night.